Welcome to the Codcast. I'm Shira Schoenberg. House Speaker Ron Mariano has been in his role for a year now, after 30 years in the state legislature. He has served as Speaker entirely during a global pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for joining me. You said recently that you do plan to run for another term for Speaker in January of 2023. So what do you like about the job?
It's a challenge, and it's been fun. The difficulty, obviously, is being remote and trying to stay in contact with 159 members that all want to see you doing something different. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but all in all, the job is still basically the same. And I think the team that we have that has worked on the remote operation of the House has done a remarkable job. We've continued to pass bills. We've done our budget on time. We did the opera, a huge spending bill without a hitch. So we've shown that we can operate remotely if necessary, while at the same time improving access for a lot of folks out in Western Mass who now can attend and listen to hearings and voice their opinion at hearings through Zoom or whatever medium we're using. So it's had disadvantages, but it's also had some advantages as we've sort of through trial and error got through the system that we have now.
Do you think there are some of the things that you learned from operating during COVID, things like remote access to hearing, that you might continue even past the pandemic?
Absolutely. I think the remote hearing situation has really increased the opportunity for folks to get involved in the process. I think that has changed the way people look at the hearing of a bill. Before, it was if you lived in Springfield, you had to commit a day to come in here and testify, and oftentimes you wouldn't be able to attend the executive session, so you wouldn't know the outcome of the bill for a long time later. Now you're actually part of the process. You can testify. You can listen to the pros and cons of the bill that you're interested in. So I think these are all worthwhile things to keep. The other thing we're doing that we don't seem to get any credit for is we're broadcasting the informal sessions on the internet. So there is a way for you to see what goes on in an informal session also.
And you did mention that COVID has kind of brought with it that challenge of being able to relate to members and talk to members when they're not in the building. And obviously it seems like that's one of the biggest parts of the role of Speaker is forming these relationships, building relationships. How have you managed to do that given COVID? Has it been more difficult?
Well, probably the most difficult thing is trying to make sure I'm fair with everybody, that I give everyone the opportunity to be heard, that the Western Mass folks have as much an opportunity to get to me as the Greater Boston or the South Shore reps who I see around town. So that's been the biggest challenge, and I've done that by phone calls, a couple of Zoom meetings, and even attending events for reps in Springfield, and after the event, having dinner with half dozen, 8 reps, and listening to their criticisms, and thankfully that it's not all criticism. There were some accolades that were bestowed, but a little mixture of both. So,
your predecessor was the longest running speaker in history. How long do you plan to hold on to the role?
Nearly as long as Bob did. I enjoyed my time with Bob very much. We were very close. I had a lot of respect for Bob and his style. But I just don't see myself lasting as long as he did. Although I do say, though, that another 3 years I'll be old enough to run for president. So,
is that in the cards?
Who knows?
So one of your biggest accomplishments was passing the bill that spent $4 billion from the American Rescue Plan Act and state surplus. And it passed a couple weeks ago during a lightly attended informal session. Given that the governor released his proposal for spending the ARPA money last June, I understand that you wanted to hold hearings, have a more deliberative process, but why wait so long that you couldn't get a final bill negotiated while you were still in full formal session?
We wanted to make sure that the money got to the areas of most need. And we wanted to identify those needs a lot better than the way the governor was doing it. The governor was throwing out chunks of money. And when that happens, you're not always sure of where it's going to end up. But through the hearing process, we identified issues like the DPH that was woefully underfunded as we got into this pandemic. We heard from the folks who were on the front lines and how frustrated they were at the lack of facilities and supplies. In education, there was nothing in the governor's plan that included education. And when we had the hearings, we heard very loudly and clearly about the needs in our educational system for COVID relief. Same with food pantries. Food pantries wasn't an issue in anyone's radar until we started to have the hearings. And then we found out that how many food pantries were close to just failing, just closing their doors. The Greater Boston Food Pantry, which supplies dozens of smaller food pantries, was close to being empty. So we identified right down to the places where this money was going to make sure that the money got there and that it all worked towards the recovery of these institutions that advocates work for and support with their sweat and equity. And we wanted to make sure that the money got to them. We heard from them, we listened to them. And I think it's been extremely effective in identifying the folks who need the money the most, and they will get the money.
And it does seem like the ARPA bill really put money into a lot of different buckets. I mean, you mentioned the public health, there's housing, healthcare, infrastructure, education. Given that this is this massive influx of one-time money, is there any initiative or any part of the spending that you think will really be transformative for the state? You know, something that someone will look back and say, this really made a huge difference in how our state operates.
That's a great question. And I think that can happen on a number of different fronts. And my hope is that it happens on more than one. Obviously, I'm totally committed to offshore winds. And in our budget and in some of the ARPA money, we've made a commitment to that. We think that can be a game changer as we strive towards a clean energy future. We think we're positioned very, very well. We have off our shores, we have some of the highest prevailing winds on the East Coast. And if we don't take advantage of that, we're silly. So I think that's one of the areas. I really do think going forward, the money we're going to put into the Department of Public Health will get us better prepared to face another pandemic if there is one on the horizon, or any other public health crisis of any magnitude. It was embarrassing that some cities and towns didn't even have a public health policy. So I think there are a number of things that are going to come out of this that will be game changers.
Why include so many earmarks in the bill? Something like $200 million worth of earmarks.
Yeah. Those legislative priorities within the larger areas of agreement between the House and Senate. As you begin to get into spending some of these monies in infrastructure and in other areas, no one knows the area that they represent better than the reps, even better than the advocates and better than some of the locals. The reps have their fingers in just about everything in their district. That's 40,000 people. And I think they can best identify some of the areas that need attention. And that's what we tried to do is listen to them as well as listening to the advocates who identified the big pictures. We wanted to get into some of the local identified areas that some of the reps have identified within that larger bucket of money. So.
Sure. You mentioned offshore wind as an area that could be some transformative investments. I know you've long been a supporter of offshore wind. You also said there's going to be an energy-related bill coming out maybe soon. Is that in the works? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, yes. We have our chairman, Roy, working on a bill to change some of the procurement laws. One of the things that I was most disappointed on this whole offshore wind rollout was the fact that our first opportunity restricted the bid procedure to just cost. And it got us a very low price per kilowatt hour, probably the lowest possible. But it did prevent companies from coming in and making an investment in our infrastructure so that they would stay here and grow with us in an industry that is beginning to take off. And that was disappointing. But I do think after, talking to the governor and talking to some of the folks who have bid, that it is time now to change the procurement laws to encourage more investment into our infrastructure, more of an investment in some of these companies to locate here and stay here. We think that that's going to create the industry that's going to provide clean energy all along the East Coast. And it's an opportunity that we had a huge advantage of, but sort of gave it away. And now we're trying to catch up a little bit. And we think a procurement change will be a big help to us. And we've even, I think, get the governor convinced to the wisdom of opening up the procurement process.
And speaking of another longtime priority of yours, healthcare. You've long talked about the need to help community hospitals, and the House recently released a bill, your bill, that focuses primarily on providing more state regulatory scrutiny of hospital expansions. Is this an attempt to stop Mass General Brigham from expanding into the suburbs?
Oh, it isn't specifically aimed at any one expansion. There are a number of expansions in the process of being initiated. But it is an attempt to put these expansions under a more vigorous scrutiny as to what it does to healthcare costs across the total spectrum. You will hear from folks who advocate for this process that they're going to lower costs in these offsite surgery centers. Well, that is true to a degree. It will be less to go to an offsite surgery center than it would be to go to the hospital in Boston. So there is a minor savings there. But what you have now done is bring the cost of a procedure into the suburbs. It is almost at a Boston rate, thereby undercutting the community hospital's rate. The community hospital rate is going to be left with only public payers, as the market attraction of a Mass General or a BI siphons off the public payers, the private payers to their offsite centers. It leaves the public payers in the community hospitals. The community hospitals are being reimbursed at the tune of about 70 cents on the dollar for their public payers on the public procedures. So we need to look, if you're going to expand through the DON process, we need to look at what impact that will have on the total market costs. And the other point in the change in this law is the DON was a DPH assessment of the expansion. There was no one in DPH that has experience with market review and market increase. That was put in the hands of the HPC. And their role is to monitor the market changes and try to control costs in the total healthcare market. So this DON process was being used to sort of circumvent that analysis by HPC on the total market influence. And it was dumping it into the DPH realm, which was not equipped to handle it and make judgments on it. So I felt it was important that we interject the HPC's ability to review the total market increase and market impact in the process. And that's what the bill does.
But if the big problem for community hospitals is really the disparity in rates between what they're paid for a procedure and what larger hospital systems are paid for the same procedure, why not address that directly through something like price regulation?
Well, that's an interesting prospect, but right now it's a highly regulated industry, healthcare, and we have guardrails on each side that sort of keep it within some controls. And I am a true believer in a free market economy, and I think the marketplace can, with some assistance, function properly. Now, if we're proved wrong that it doesn't or can't function properly, then obviously I'd be willing to listen to any solution that made some sense. But I do think I'd prefer a free market solution before I get into any price capping or anything like that.
And the Senate has passed its own health care bill. They focused on mental health. Their bill would require better insurance coverage for mental health treatment, an annual mental health wellness exam. It would try to address the emergency room boarding crisis where psychiatric patients are waiting for days for a bed. Will the House take up the Senate's bill, and do you anticipate that bill being negotiated in tandem with the community hospital bill?
It's a real good question. I'm sure we'll take up the mental health bill. I was one of the first, when I was chairman of insurance, to get mental health visits covered under your health insurance policy. I've been a believer in that since my time in insurance, which goes back to 2006. So I'm sure we'll take up the bill. There will be things that we totally agree on, and there will be discrepancies, and the bill will go through the regular process of, I'm sure, a conference committee, and we'll resolve those differences. As to whether or not it's going to be tied to the DON bill, I don't know. I need a crystal ball to determine that. So.
Another Senate priority is the Senate voted to make vote by mail permanent. They included other reforms like same-day voter registration. Do you think the House is going to be looking at making vote by mail permanent? Is that a bill that you anticipate taking up this session?
Yeah, well, we had voted for that, and we voted for a lot of the things that are in that bill in Senate over there, and they held it because they wanted to do a bigger bill. So we've taken these votes, and I think what we're working on now is a way to rather than reinvent the wheel, just get us all lined up in the same page. So.
And I know that you have passed a sports betting bill in the House. The Senate hasn't taken that one up. Is Massachusetts falling behind by not legalizing sports betting?
Oh, I believe that's true. I do believe that's true. We're surrounded now by every New England state, I think, has sports betting right now. And that's lost revenue. I have friends that drive to Rhode Island to get on their app and place bets on the football games. It was my hope. We voted on this thing twice. It was my hope that we'd have it in play for the football season. Now I don't know if we'll even have it for March Madness. So I have great concerns that we're being left at the altar. We're losing $80 million in registration fees alone. Registration fees that occur every 5 years. Probably about $60 million in tax revenue. So I do think it's a lost opportunity. one that every other state seems to have figured out a way to get it done. I can't understand why we haven't.
And what are your priorities for the final year of this session when you return in January? What are you going to be taking up?
Well, obviously, we want to flesh out the offshore wind. I think there's an opportunity with some of the APA money and some of the job training money we have to really start to make this into a real industry. We did it with mass biotech, and we can do it with this. I think we have an understanding of what it will take to succeed, and so I'm confident that with the help from the Senate and the governor, that we can create something that really drives the clean energy dream in Massachusetts. And then there's going to be a lot of different environmental issues that we're going to have to deal with. I mean, we Thanksgiving Day, we had a 60-degree day in the middle of November. And we have 50-mile-an-hour winds. We have to make sure we're doing everything we can to short circuit any disruption that we're creating in our climate. So there's going to be an awful lot of things to keep us busy. And I, for one, know how fortunate I am to be in a position where the federal government has saw fit to inject us with large infusions of cash, which I certainly can appreciate. And my commitment to the citizens of Massachusetts is to spend that money as wisely and as smartly as possible. And although we may not need to take as long to do the second batch of APA money as we had to do the first, I do think that we will do it in a thoughtful, slower than probably most people would like fashion.
So when a historian looks back on the Mariano speakership, in 5 years and 10 years, what's going to be your measure of whether you were successful in what you've hoped to accomplish?
That's another good question. Let me think about that. I can be flip and say everyone gets a successful bet in the Patriots Super Bowl. But no, I think in an offshore wind industry that's stabilized our energy portfolio so that businesses and citizens in Massachusetts have reliable energy at a reasonable rate. If that's something I could walk out of here having done, I would be extremely proud. I really would think, we talking to the folks who were coming in and investing money in this state, we have the opportunity to do almost a third of what President Biden has authorized for offshore wind just off the coast of Massachusetts. So I think this is an opportunity that we may never see again at a time where we need it. Obviously, we all use 2050 as a target date for carbon free. This can get us there pretty quickly without a lot of disruption with some new jobs. And we're looking at maybe even having to invest in the whole delivery system, the whole system of getting the energy from the ocean to the home. So.
And one final, very serious question that I'm sure our listeners want to know the answer to. Why'd you shave off your mustache when you became speaker?
Maybe because I'm a weirdo. Everyone was growing hair. Everyone I knew had a beard and a mustache or a goatee. And I knew I had to take to the floor. And already we had scattered attendance in the chamber. So I said, I wanted to do something to sort of lighten the whole atmosphere of going to the mic. And so I had shaved it and kept the mask on the whole day. And so no one knew I had shaved. And I opened up and I'm trying to remember exactly what I said. I said, you people are here in attendance for a truly historical event. And I said, you're about to see Ron Mariano sans mustache, and I took off the mask. It was just a bit of theater to try and lighten the mood and bring a little levity to the midst of the pandemic. So,
much needed in the times we live in.
I thought it was funny, but I don't know if anyone else did.
Little lightheartedness, always good in a time like this. And you can read more about what the legislature is up to on commonwealthmagazine.org. House Speaker Ron Mariano, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.